Good afternoon. We are going to take up the subject of specific work, or the nature of our treatment work. And I will first answer this question, which is a very important one, or rather the answer is very important, to the understanding of that very subject of specific work, how specifically to handle problems of any nature that may arise in our personal experience or in the whole world experience. And the question has to do with resist not evil, to protest against evil rules, I can't read that, but anyhow it is the subject is whether protesting against evil is not really cooperating with evil in remaining silent, even if inwardly we disagree. Now, here you must understand that you are dealing with different levels of consciousness, and when we teach, we are teaching how to live from the standpoint of infinite weight consciousness. This would not apply to the person who has not yet attained this level. In other words, on the human level of life, if someone wrongs you, you may sue them. On the human level of life, if someone threatens your pocketbook, you may shoot them. And in every experience in life, there is a way to overcome the evil that threatens you. But you must remember that the master, who knew all about resisting evil and an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, he knew all about the Hebraic teaching. He was a Hebrew rabbi. Nevertheless, he said to his own followers, while you have heard that said of old, now I say to you. And then he revealed that in the consciousness that he was revealing, you were no longer to resist evil. You were no longer to seek revenge. You were no longer to use any human means of refuting evil. Now you must understand this. No one in their human estate, even though they may belong to a Christian church, can follow a Christian teaching until they have risen that high in consciousness. All Christian churches today operate from the standpoint of Judaism. None of them have yet accepted the Christian teaching. The reason is that they have not themselves been able to rise to the level of Christian consciousness. Therefore, they function in the Hebraic consciousness, even while calling themselves Christians, and sometimes even while persecuting the Hebrews. Now, yes, we witnessed an example of that in California 2 months ago while on our classwork there, when at the very Easter time, a man and a woman who were being tried for murder were eventually convicted, and the press and the people feared that the judge would only give them life imprisonment, and the storm that went up that they must be executed. They must be executed. And of course the next day was Easter, and they all went to their Christian churches, secure in the fact that they were Christians. There wasn't a Christian among them. But they had not yet risen to the Christian level of consciousness, which says you do not punish murder by more murder. So when we come to our individual experience, if you are on the spiritual path, you will gradually, not all at once, but gradually leave the Hebraic consciousness. And remember this, my words are not anti-Semitic. There are just as many Christians who are members of the Jewish synagogue as there are Christians in the Christian church. Because when I speak of Hebraic consciousness or Christian consciousness, I have no reference to what church you belong to, but only to what state of consciousness you have risen to. If you are at the level of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, if you are at the level of wanting revenge for offenses, you are in the Hebraic consciousness, and it makes no difference whether you belong to a Christian church or a Vedanta church, Protestant, Catholic, or whatnot. Now, as you attain this consciousness, you will find that it is not necessary to resist evil outwardly or openly, and you are not cooperating with evil if you understand the principle and its application, but you will be helping to overcome it. When you are faced with what appears to be an evil, and you would meet it spiritually, you must first know that evil is not a power. You must also know that you are not trying to change a human evil into a human good. You are not trying to exchange one human condition for another human condition, but that your function is to bear witness to spiritual presence and power, not human good. You must be careful of this. When you are faced with sin, you must not try to change it to purity. When you are faced with disease, you must not try to change it to health. When you are faced with death, you must not try to change it to life. When you are faced with loss, you must not try to change it to gain. What must you do? You must realize that neither human loss nor human gain is of any moment. You must realize that neither life nor death can separate you from the love of God. You must realize that if you had the best health in all of the world this minute, there wouldn't be a thing to prevent you dropping dead the next minute. Therefore, in facing a condition of evil, you do not try to change it into good. you realize the non-power or the maya or illusion of both human evil and human good, and then your prayer is, let me bear witness to spiritual truth, to spiritual harmony, to spiritual good. This is rising above the pairs of opposites. This is rising above both good and evil. And you see, you cannot get back to Eden until you have risen above both good and evil. While you are merely trying to exchange evil for good or turn evil into good, you are not in paradise. Because regardless of the degree of good, it can again become evil. Have you not seen the struggles of people to attain 1 million and then see them end up with nothing? Have you not seen the struggle of athletes and health addicts build themselves up to what they think is a perfect physical temple and then wreck themselves? Have you not seen even the best of people, those who strive to be righteous, have you not seen how in spite of their so-called righteousness, something or other pulls them down and destroys them physically or mentally or morally or financially? So you perceive that if you are living a life of merely trying to change good, or rather evil, into good, if you are merely trying to overcome evil, it profiteth you nothing. If only I could recite to you a history from Genghis Khan to Hitler to show you how many evils have been overcome in the history of the world. Have they been? Has one of them ever been overcome? Has any of the evils of this world been overcome? You might tell me that there are some diseases that no longer exist, and that I'll tell you there are 5 times more diseases than ever were known to our grandparents. Now, evil cannot be overcome by might or by power. There never will be a war to end a war. There never will be a cure of disease that will cure disease. Have you not witnessed in the last 20 years the discovery of miracle drugs? And aren't you witnessing now their lack of efficacy, their inability to maintain the progress that was made? Are you not witnessing one miracle drug after another, unable to stand up, and something else having to be done? No. The human knows no other way than fighting back. And so he wins a war and loses the next one. Or, as in the case of our modern wars, World War I and II, we've had victorious sides. They're both bankrupt and corrupt. Victory has been a farce. There is no such thing as a victory over evil, except as we realize this, that by the Spirit, by the invisible, indescribable, something which we really know not, there is an overcoming and an overcoming until he come whose right it is. In our individual experience, it works this way. as we learn how to face disease without fighting it, without trying to overcome it, without medicating it or operating it, as we learn to sit beside it in the silence until the Spirit of God, the Spirit within us, bears witness, then we find health being established of a permanent nature, of a different nature, a nature that doesn't have to be overcome again and again and again. In the same way, when false appetites are overcome by willpower, by trying, by effort, by fighting it, you know how many times it proves to be not lasting. But false appetites, false desires, when overcome spiritually, remain a permanent blessing. On the human level of life, to take a resist not attitude would merely mean to give your adversary the opportunity to take advantage of you. On the spiritual path, this is not true. On the spiritual path, when you abide within the center of your being, remembering not by might, not by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. Man shall not live by bread alone, by force or by power, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. And then you wait to receive some word. When you begin, many times in small ways, to watch evil dissolve, there was the case of the great Hebrew prophet, a man who was functioning centuries before Christ, centuries before Jesus, but functioning as in the Christian consciousness, who, when his Hebrew people came to him and said, the enemy is coming at us and they are stronger than we are, they outnumber us, and he said, fear not. They have only the arm of flesh. We have the Lord God Almighty. And then Scripture says they rested in His Word. They didn't go out to fight. They didn't go out to struggle. They rested in His Word. And then what happened? The enemy fought among themselves and destroyed themselves. So it is that we witness in this work, whether we undertake problems of health, morals, finances, any form of evil that opposes us, injustice, inequality, we find this, that if we can resist the desire to change evil into good and are willing to bear witness to spiritual presence and power, that harmony evolves right here on the human plane. In matters of health, in matters of commerce, industry, even in matters of government. You'd be surprised how many matters of government, how many of those in governments turn to this sort of activity, to this very activity of the infinite way, for the solving of their problems. And find problems solved not by might nor by power, not by saying this one is right and that one is wrong, but by seeking the spiritual solution. There is a spiritual solution to every problem. The manifestation of that solution is dependent upon the degree of our ability to withdraw from wanting a human victory. the degree in which we do not seek to change evil into good, but rather wish to bear witness to spiritual presence, spiritual power, spiritual justice, spiritual equality, spiritual equity, spiritual harmony. Spiritual harmony, when it comes, translates itself on our very level of experience. Now, here is a very strange thing, and it's asked in the question. When we meditate and then things harmonize in our life, we find the right parking place, the right job, the right home. Who or what decides in what form the harmony is to flow out? God, of course, has no knowledge of a physical universe or physical needs. God has no knowledge of a physical heart that's either functioning rightly or wrongly, properly or improperly. God has no knowledge of men who are warring with each other or striking against each other. Such things could never come into the consciousness of God, for they would be dissolved. So it is that when we turn for a spiritual solution to what seems to be a material problem, let us say this very subject of an industrial dispute, and we turn to spirit for a solution, who is it that decides the right or wrong, or who shall win, or how the victory shall be achieved? The answer is really the one that you will have to understand through this illustration. At one time it is said that Joan of Arc was asked, "Does God speak to you in French?" And she said, "I don't know. I hear him in French." Is it not clear to you that God does not speak in English, German, French, Spanish, Italian, or any other language? Is it not clear to you that God does not reveal himself as Jesus or Buddha or Lao Tzu or John or Paul? Is it not clear that God is spirit? And that when spirit announces itself, we interpret it in accord with our own concepts of what we may expect. For instance, if we are following the Christian mysticism, it is not at all strange if at some time or other in our meditation we should behold a figure of Jesus Christ, or of John, or of Paul. It has happened to many. On the other hand, those who follow the Oriental mysticism, should it be thought strange that they behold the Buddha, or some figure that represents to them the highest form of humanified deity? Of course, just as when you turn in meditation, if you receive the Word of God, and if your normal language is English, German, French, that's the way you're going to receive it. And if there are a dozen of us in this room, and each with a different language, each will receive it in their language. Yet God is not speaking in anyone's language. God is spirit. But we have to receive spirit in accord with the conditioning of our own being. So it is then that while God knows nothing of disease, God knows nothing of a heart that has to beat so and so fast. If God knew anything about that, you can be assured it would be beating correctly all of the time. Nothing is outside the power of God. But we have an idea of how the heart should beat. And so when God voices harmony of body, it is only natural that we interpret it in that degree of heartbeat or that rate of that degree of fever or temperature, and so forth and so on. You know, it's a strange thing that sometimes people who cannot sleep or cannot sleep enough turn to the Spirit and find afterward that they sleep 8 or 9 good hours. And I suppose they would imagine that God intends that we should sleep 8 or 9 hours. Now let it be understood clearly that it isn't necessary to sleep at all as far as God's concerned. God neither slumbereth nor sleepeth, ever, nor does his image and likeness. And therefore, if we turn to the Spirit and find ourselves sleeping 8 or 9 hours, it is because we have conditioned ourselves to accept that as normal sleep. Whereas there have been many wonderful men accomplish wonderful achievements and have done with 2 and 3 and 4 hours sleep. And I'm sure you that if God intended that they have 8 hours sleep, they would have it. Oh no, but they conditioned themselves and knew that they could function with that much sleep, and they did. So it is then that spiritual harmony comes as infinite perfection, but the degree of it and the manner of it that we experience is proportionate to our conditioned mind, to what our minds have been conditioned to through education, environment, sometimes even prenatal experience. In other words, each one of us is a conditioned person. We have been conditioned somewhat by our ancestry, somewhat by our nationality, somewhat by our religion, a great deal more by our education, and then finally by our personal experience in life. Put all of these together and the sum total of them is what we humanly are. Therefore, when we turn to Spirit, it is more than likely that the grace of God will come through in some conditioned form, conditioned by our state of consciousness. So it is. If I were to concern myself with supply, I presume that it would come to me in dollars. But if you concerned yourself with supply, it would come in Swiss francs. And I don't think God has made any more Swiss francs than he has made American dollars. There again is the conditioning. There is the conditioning. Sometimes good unfolds to us. And strangely enough, it unfolds to one person in a beautiful automobile, another a beautiful boat, another one a beautiful diamond. Why these things? Why? Or a beautiful home. Why? Why, if God is giving us his grace, should it not be that we all receive either a beautiful home or... No. We condition what comes to us by something latent in our consciousness. Somewhere within us there is an unvoiced dream. of owning a beautiful home or a beautiful boat or a beautiful car or a beautiful jewel, and lo and behold, it happens that way. I know in my own case that I have always, even when I didn't know why or didn't know the nature of it, I always thought of something wonderful in the form of jade. Jade, to me, always represented something wonderful. Why? It must have to do with some previous incarnation. But jade always seemed to me to represent something very wonderful. And you know that as the good things of life began to unfold to me through my spiritual awareness, the first thing you know, jades began to come. A little jade here and a bigger jade there and a thin one here and a thick one there, until I really have a nice little collection of jades. No attempt just to be a collector of jades, but it just seems that jade has a way of finding me. Well, I can well understand that yachts and dollars and something else would unfold to others if somewhere within them that represents their language. So God speaks in spirit, but Joan of Arc hears it in French. I hear it in English. And one night, my wife awakened to hear me talking French fluently, although I don't know it. But I was, because at that particular time, something was operating at that level through me. Nothing is impossible because, you see, our true nature is unconditioned mind and unconditioned spirit, unconditioned soul. We are really unconditioned consciousness, but the conditioning we have received from grandparents and parents, the conditioning we have received in our national teachings, religious teachings, they make a state of limitation of us. An absolute state of limitation. And it is for this reason you will find, as you travel, that the people who are really free of national and religious prejudices are those who've traveled the most and met the most people. In other words, they've broken through the conditioning that they received at home. I know in New York City, we received a lot of conditioning in one of our newspapers that had as its banner every day, "My country, right or wrong, my country." Can you imagine if you read that every day for 20 years, how little you'd think of any other country or their rights or... No, only my country. And you know people who have that same religious conviction. Only my people are going to go to heaven and all the rest of you people are going to burn. Do you see that? And so it is that the conditioning we received. I remember one time speaking to a Christian Science teacher, a man really of a high state of spiritual consciousness. And something that I said shocked him. And it took him 2 years before he came to the realization that it was true. And then he said to me, "You know who's to blame for that in my life? My Scotch grandmother. I was brought up at her knee, and she taught me those things at her knee, and I believed them." Certainly, some of those teachings that were given to you as children, you can't get out of your system. One of those very things is the world's inability to really forgive those who sin. You'd be surprised how these church teachings have made us so narrow, so bigoted, so destructive to each other, that we forget that the Christian teaching is, "Neither do I condemn thee. Thy sins be forgiven thee." And all we think to do is to excommunicate somebody from the church, or execute them in the gas chamber, or hang them, or do something horrible to punish them for their sins. And we don't really realize that that's the conditioning we have received, so that it has made us even unable to read the Bible. We've even lost the capacity to read the Bible and see what it says. We must condition what it says by what we were taught. Now, in the facing of problems, you have the overcoming of the conditioning that you have received throughout your lifetime. For instance, from the moment of conception, your parents were fearing two powers. They were hoping you'd be born normally and joyously and freely, but they were fearing that something would happen to the babe. And for 9 months they kept on hoping on one side and fearing on the other, and not being certain then until they looked the babe right in the face and said, "Oh, thank God you're all right." It's really a miracle that so many are. Whereas, now this infant is already indoctrinated with fear. Already it's been carrying 9 months of its parents' fear around on its shoulders. Now it comes out into the open and it gets the doctor's fears. Now, don't get that baby in a draft. I'll be sure to keep him covered. I'll be sure not to have him covered too much. And from that time on until it starts to go outside to play, there's more fear over that child than there is love. The minute it gets outside, then we begin to fear kidnappers and automobiles and so forth. Now, this is conditioning. And we as humans grow up conditioned that way. And when you come to the spiritual path, you have to undo that. You have to consciously accept God as infinity, infinite being, infinite power. You have to accept God as infinite good. That's not easy. That's not easy. With every problem, you have to retire within yourself. God is, and God is closer than breathing. God is omnipresent where I am, and God is infinite. God is infinite good. Right here, you have to go and wipe out most of your church teachings. Because according to your church teachings, God is both good and evil. Even in your funeral ceremonies, you have God blamed for bringing this dear one home. Sometimes with a cancer. You can't do it gently, the old fellow. He has to hit you with a cancer, a polio, consumption, the hard way. You don't believe that. Now, what you did once, you did when you went to the funeral of a child, and you heard the minister say, God has called this dear one home. You believed it. And you didn't even stop to think how horrible that God must be if that's the way he's got to do it. God doesn't call anyone home at any age that's ever been known. The whole secret of the Master was that he came to do the will of his Father, and that was overcoming death. Even Peter's grandmother, and she must have been as old as God, even Peter's grandmother was saved. See? Why? Because God has no pleasure in your dying. God has not provided for death. God has only provided life eternal and immortal. And when we know that, when our time comes to outgrow this physical frame, we will do it without having to be stricken down with all of the senilities of old age and all of the horrors of cancer and consumption and polio. When the time comes to make the transition, and it does, because We are not supposed to live at the level of the physical frame forever, any more than we are to live at the level of infancy forever. We mature, and we go on from glory to glory. But we should step out of this phase of existence without being pushed out. So with every disease that you handle for yourself or another, you have to consciously remember that it's no part of God's will. And for that reason, it has no power. Only that which is ordained of God is power. Only that which is empowered of God is power. You have to train yourself to undo all that your parents taught you and all that your church taught you, until you come to the absolute conviction that God is all, and God is omnipresence, and God is infinite, but above all things, God is good. The power of God is only good. In this same way, when you are handling things specifically, you usually find that some law is involved. It may be a law of infection, or a law of contagion, or a law of seasons, or a law of weather, or a law of age. You have the age of puberty, and you have the age of maturity, and you have the age of change of life. What do you call it? Menopause. You have all these different ages, and these are beliefs of age, and they're not real. They're not of God. Therefore, these transitions from childhood to maturity, and maturity to a higher maturity, all of these physiological changes should take place without pain, without discord, without inharmony, because while they are natural functions of the physical body, they have no law of God to oppose their action. They have no law of God under which to function. Therefore, there is no need for these discords. In specifically working with all cases that have to do with human relationships, such as we have in families, marriages, parents and children, or other relatives, or human relationships in industry, or human relationships in government, you also have a specific truth that must be known, which is an overcoming of more conditioning. That is this. We have been brought up to believe, and psychology would foster this belief, that we each have a mind of our own and a will of our own. And that isn't true. There is only one universal mind, and there is only one universal will. And to know this truth separates us from the belief of minds many and wills many. When you are faced with problems of relationships, marital, with children, relatives, in business, in government, above all, you must realize this, that it is the mind of God that is doing the functioning, and that we, all of us, are but instruments of that functioning. Therefore, there is but one mind and there is but one will functioning among us. That will have one of two effects. It will either bring us all into harmony together, or those who are adamant will be removed from our sphere. That is why, in our work, we can never guarantee when couples come to us that they will remain man and wife. Sometimes the coming to us will bring about separation. Why? Because if it isn't in accord with spiritual harmony for them to function together, aren't they better off separate? If they are to remain at dagger's end forever, is that a life to live? Just because somebody mumbled jumbo over them, you're married? If marriages were all made in heaven, there would be no divorce. There too, there is a mistake in the marriage ceremony. Every church makes the same mistake. It says, what God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. That's utter nonsense. If God joined anyone together, you don't think they could be put asunder. Is there some God, is there some power that can undo the work of God? Heaven forbid. You can't find a power that can take light out of the sun or warmth out of the sun, can you? No, because God put it there. You can't find a power that can take H2O out of water. Of course not. You can't do it. As long as water is water, there's H2O, because God put it there. Nobody can put asunder what God put together, and so there never would be a broken marriage if marriages were made in heaven. Because what God joins together, no set of circumstances on earth can ever put asunder. But you know as well as I do that there are loads of marriages that weren't made in heaven. They have too many good human reasons for them to be suspected as being heavenly. In fact, there's been a book written about that in the last month or so over in England, I believe, about all of these marriages that have been made that haven't even a suspicion of heaven about them. But the point is this: what God hath joined together, no man can put asunder. And therefore, when you are dealing with human relationships, to remember that will remove every single obstacle there is to harmony. But where there isn't a spiritual union, it may dissolve the human one in order that a more satisfying experience can be had. It doesn't mean that we all enjoy the fruitage of that benevolent act of God either. We're allowed more than one mistake in a lifetime. See this, however. We are conditioned into believing that there are minds many and wills many. When we are called upon to work with any case involving human relationships, let us first realize this: God is the only mind and God is the only will. God is the only life, and only God can function. And then you will find out that you do restore harmony. In the same way, you have the universal claim that there are two powers in the world, and you have to reduce your treatment, your realization, to the truth that there is but one power in the world. Now, I cannot take up with you in this brief time all of the principles that have been revealed that constitute the Infinite Way message, but they're all in the writings. And as you study the writings, you will find the specific principles with which we work and which are responsible for whatever measure of harmony this work has been able to bring out. There are three major points that will come up in every problem you're called upon to meet. The first step is to realize one power. This, you see, is of paramount importance because you're dealing in every case with a belief in two powers. You're dealing in every case, no matter what its nature, It may be a mental case, moral, financial, employment, human relationships, whatever it is, you are dealing with a universal belief in two powers, and you will not succeed in your work until you have brought yourself to the realization that there is but one power. Then, every claim that is brought to you, every case that is brought to you, has a foundational belief in personalization. In other words, this evil is in you, or this sin is in you, or this disease is in you, or this bad temper is in you, or this unemployment is in you, or this lack and limitation is in you. Therefore, the very next thing that must be realized is that evil of any and every nature is impersonal. It does not have its foundation in any person. Those through whom it manifests are just temporary victims of a universal belief. But evil does not exist in a person. Evil does not originate in a person. Evil is no part of any person. The nearest we can voice it is the way Paul did. Even though I don't sin, I know I'm not a sinner, yet I feel a sense of sin in me. In other words, this universal belief in two-ness, this universal belief in all of the sensual things of the world. But even though we feel them, even though we may have a temptation to steal, lie, cheat, don't condemn yourself or your patient or your student. Realize that this error, evil, whatever name or nature, is not personal. It is absolutely impersonal. It has its origin in a universal belief in two powers. It has its origin in a universal belief of a selfhood apart from God. Just as right now there is a belief operating in this room that we are a group of people, whereas we are one. The same life that's flowing in you is flowing in me. The same life that's flowing in each one of us is flowing in me. The same mind that is functioning in me is functioning in you. There cannot be many minds, or we wouldn't even understand each other. We wouldn't recognize each other. We're all looking out through the same mind. And the same life functions in our veins. There's no such thing as Jewish life and Christian life and Mohammedan life. There is only life. There is no such thing as the life of a rose or the life of an orchid. It is the same life functioning in both at different levels of expression. What happens the moment we realize this is that we find among each other a basis of oneness, a basis of harmony, a basis of justice, equity, equality. And we only do that if we realize the life that's flowing in me is the same life flowing in you. The mind of me is the mind of you. The Spirit of God that animates me is the same Spirit of God that animates you. When we know that, we've brought harmony among ourselves. And as we leave here, to know that the same mind that functioned in Christ Jesus is the mind of every man makes it possible for us to be at peace with everyone we meet, in committee, in business, social life, government life, any other life. Our first step, then, in applying these principles specifically is to realize the one power. The second, the impersonal nature of all evil. Thirdly, the impersonal nature of our own being. We are not separate people. We are all people with the same mind, the same life, the same love, the same spirit, the same body, and we're all infinite, individual manifestations of the one. And that permits us to commune together. to unite together in all spiritual purposes. But you will also see that it prevents us from intruding upon each other in any way. It prevents us from taking advantage of each other, because this brings to light that inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of these, my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Inasmuch as I do good to anyone on earth, the good is returning unto me, because it has been done under the same life under which it was done. Any evil that I do, even unto the least of these on earth, I'm doing to myself, because there is only one life, one mind, one spirit, one soul. And therefore I'm doing it to my own. It behooves us then to realize this. The one power, the impersonal nature of evil, the impersonal nature of our selfhood. God constitutes our selfhood. Mine, and yours, and his, and hers, and its. You will see that in applying this to your problems and the problems of those who come to you, that it stretches out into infinity the different ways in which you can apply it. But always it will be these same principles that you will be applying. These are the major principles. There are others that are necessary to know. Those you will find as you study the writings. I would like to say this to you, that on the subject of personal relationships, that this is all summed up in 2 chapters of my writings. One of them, love thy neighbor in practicing the presence, and the other, in relationship of oneness and the art of spiritual healing. Those 2 chapters cover this entire subject of personal relationships. In my 1959 work, which you have on tapes, you'll find this entire subject of impersonalization and one power. Work with these and you'll really have a basis for the development of a healing consciousness. Remember, the working with these principles develops your own consciousness and mind to that point where we can look out here and say, I am you, so I better be very careful what I do to you. Thank you.